Carson, are the eyes of Texas upon us?
Texas is back, folks.
That's not what I titled this. Welcome into the Busse and Gourdie show, everyone. It is Alec Busse, joined by Carson Gourdie. As always, guys, we are fired up to be doing a week 2 reaction show, which was a phenomenal week 2 with all sorts of storylines. Of course, we will dive into Texas going on the road to Bryant-Denny Stadium and beating Alabama. We're definitely going to talk about a few other games, and then later in the show, we're going to talk about the bombshell that kind of dropped on Saturday night, right as the Pac-12 After Dark games were preparing to wrap up, and new details came out on Sunday at Michigan State. So we will talk about that, but we are going to talk about the Texas-Alabama game first. Texas beats Alabama 34-24. The Longhorns look, for all intents and purposes, Carson, like the better football team for the entirety of 4 quarters against Alabama on Saturday at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Their offensive and defensive lines dominated this game. Quinn Ewers has his best game as a starting quarterback for Texas. Goes 24 of 38 for 349 yards, 3 touchdown passes, and it could have been a few more if a couple balls weren't dropped. Adonai Mitchell, 3 receptions, 2 of them go for touchdown, 78 yards. Xavier Worthy obviously has 5 catches, a bomb of a touchdown on a rainbow pass from Quinn in the first half. But the story of this, Carson, is the way that Texas's defensive lines played, or defensive and offensive line played against the Crimson Tide in their 34-24 victory against Nick Saban and Alabama.
When's the last time Alabama's lost by double digits at home?
2004. 2004, I believe, was to South Carolina.
Like when Alabama would lose to Ole Miss, like Ole Miss would have some crazy plays. They'd throw for 500 yards, and Alabama just couldn't keep up in a shootout. This was different. Texas straight up, the defensive line played phenomenal, and Quinn stepped it up. I had concerns. After Rice, he wasn't hitting any deep shots. Last year, couldn't hit any deep shots. And I texted you in the second quarter. I said, as of now, in college football, Quinn Ewers is a mediocre college football quarterback. He cannot hit the deep shot. And then I also sent a text.
Then his next throw.
Following this text, he's going to become great. Literally 2 minutes later.
His next throw. It was legitimately his next throw was the 44-yard bomb to Worthy in the back of the end zone.
And it's the start of a new era of Texas football. It is, because Sarkisian is building up the trenches. This did not happen under Charlie Strong, Tom Herman. He's going to have a pipeline with great quarterbacks, with Quinn, Arch Manning. Them in Georgia are going to be the 2 sexiest teams in the SEC over the next 5 years. Unless Bama gets generational talent at the quarterback position.
Yeah, so I am not there yet.
I'm there.
I am not there yet. No, and I feel comfortable not in saying that publicly that I'm not there yet. Sorry, as I hit my microphone. I'm not there yet. To me, I don't think this win against Alabama means that Texas is back. I was very high on Texas entering this season, but for me, Texas being back means not screwing up the rest of the way. They're going to be probably a touchdown favorite in what I would imagine their last 10 games of the regular season. And if they're not a touchdown favorite against Oklahoma, it'll probably be at least 6 points, I would imagine. Not screwing up and going and now playing for a Big 12 title, winning a Big 12 title, being in a position to be selected for the college football playoff is Texas being back. We've seen Texas.
No, we haven't.
No, let me finish. We've seen Texas play really well against these highly ranked teams in the preseason. I thought that Texas would compete with Bama. I predicted them to cover on our show. I think you did as well on Friday. And that didn't surprise me. Now Texas needs to put it together for the rest of the season, and they get a really good test against a Wyoming team that beat Texas Tech in week 1 next week. So Texas is certainly trending in the right way. There's a different vibe around this program. It's why I was higher on them this season than I had been in previous years. They're developing talent well. They're recruiting at a level that they haven't previously, and more specifically at positions that they haven't recruited at a high level at previously. And Sark deserves a ton of credit for that, but he also deserves a ton of credit for developing the talent. And that is where Texas failed in previous coaching tenures, whether it was the end of Mac Brown, Charlie Strong, Tom Herman, all of those coaches at the end of or through their entire tenures struggle to develop, especially on the offensive and defensive lines. Kelvin Banks is one of the best offensive tackles in the country. There's 3 defensive linemen on Texas's roster, Byron Murphy, Tiandre Sweat. Specifically, those 2 are top 2-3 round draft picks. Jalen Ford is a preseason Big 12 Player of the Year. Their 5-star freshman linebacker, Anthony Hill, had a huge sack in the second half of that game. For Texas to be back, it's going to be continuing to do those things. And it's going to be continuing to now not screw around and lose to a Kansas State and Austin later this year, or lose at Iowa State in their last Big 12 road game. That is Texas being back. Now it's about, can you maintain this level of focus? Can you maintain this level of concentration and commitment to the grind of completing a college regular season of 12 weeks with a 11 or 12 win record? Because that is now the challenge, and quite frankly, should be the expectation for Texas the rest of the season.
I agree with you. That's what it would take for them to be back, right? Don't lose to Iowa State. Don't lose to TCU. Don't lose to Kansas State. All I'm saying is it's a lot more likely they're not losing those games this year because this is a legit football team. Like, we want to talk about Texas playing good against the big brands in the past. Which ones besides the Sugar Bowl, where Georgia didn't even show up to play, where players are sitting out, and beating a 4-8 Notre Dame team that was overrated in the preseason? We've never seen Texas, probably since 2005 against Ohio State in the non-conference play, played this well against a big brand. Like, literally just dominated Alabama. It was lucky to be a 10-point game, as you said. There could have been an extra couple touchdowns. Like, this isn't the Tom Herman Texas teams that would play well against Georgia once. Like, it's a lot more likely they're going to go 11-1 and 12-0. And I'm confident they're going to do it this year.
I like I said, I picked this team to win the Big 12 this year. I certainly picked them to go to the Big 12 title game. And it would be a massive letdown if they don't reach that pedestal now, especially because they went on the road and beat Bama. They are going to be favored in every game the rest of the season. And the way Quinn looked was great. The way the offensive line looked was phenomenal. Do you know how many times Quinn Ewers was sacked last night, Carson? 0. 0 times Quinn Ewers was sacked. Texas returned all 5 starting offensive linemen from last season. And Alabama's defensive front is supposed to be their biggest strength this season. Dallas Ford is a really good player. He didn't get touched last night. He didn't get sacked.
They're not, like, the only game I'm looking at Texas' schedule. Like, what do you think are some realistic speed bumps? Kansas State and Oklahoma?
Yeah.
Those are the 2. And yeah, if Kansas State, historically, they don't beat Texas. That's the one team Texas knows how to beat consistently.
In the last 5 years, they don't.
Oklahoma. Okay, if you lose a rivalry game, I can forgive that. Avenge it in the Big 12 title. So if this team goes even 11-2 with 2 losses to Oklahoma, even if they go 12-1 with a loss to Oklahoma, but they win the Big 12 title game, it's a great year. And this is what they needed to go into the SEC. They are going to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I hope they understand. Like, they had a target on their back going into the SEC to begin with, and it's a little bit larger now as their fans are chanting SEC throughout Bryant-Denny Stadium. And, they have players talking about, come to Texas. The Alabama transfer on Texas's roster, running back, is running over in front of Alabama's recruiting section last night on Saturday and telling them to come to Texas. Like, you got a target on your back now if you're Texas, and it's a big one. And Steve Sarkisian has talked a ton this season about the motto for this Longhorn team being embrace the hate. Well, we're gonna have a lot of it because there's still a lot of people that doubt this Texas team, I think. And I think the reason there's a lot of people doubting it is because of the way they saw Alabama play on Saturday night. And let's be real about something. Like, Alabama didn't really look that great in this game, and they had some weaknesses show up. I think I read that they've now lost 4 of their last 7 games against Power 5 opponents. It's a weird spot right now for Alabama. it's very clear that they didn't have the advantage at quarterback. It's even more clear that they didn't have the advantage at the skill positions, specifically receiver. And where does Bama go from here? What does this mean for Bama?
For this year, they're going to be a 10-2 football team, and they'll go to the Peach Bowl, the Cotton Bowl. It's going to be a fine year because realistically, I see one more loss on that schedule potentially, and it would be like an LSU. Let's say Daniels has a great game, but then they still go and then they lose the SEC title game to Georgia. I mean, worst case, this Alabama team goes 10-3.
9-3 in the regular season, I would argue.
You think they can go 9-3? You think they can lose to Ole Miss? Tennessee
I think
at
they
home?
could lose to Ole Miss. They could maybe lose to like an A&M. I don't know who their crossovers are off the top of my head. They could certainly lose to LSU. I mean, I think to think that they're going to beat A&M and as a certainty is probably unfair to A&M. And I know, and we're going to talk about A&M later in the show.
They did not look good.
A&M beat them, 2 years ago at Kyle Field, and they probably should have beat them last year in Bryant-Denny. And Jalen Milroe was quarterback for that game last year, and Jalen Milroe is likely going to be the quarterback for Alabama this year in that game unless something changes. I think it's unfair to just completely discount A&M in that game.
Just realistically, they're going to go 10-2. I kind of trust the Saban, but that's not the expectation this year. I mean, this is a team that has top 2 betting odds to win the national title preseason. Saban knows what he needs to do. He needs to get another good quarterback. When you had Mac Jones, Jalen Hurts, Tua, Bryce Young, you could get away with a lot of these issues. We saw it last year firsthand. They almost lost to Texas. If Bryce Young doesn't play a great game, they lose that. We saw against Texas A&M when Bryce Young was out, they were 2 yards away from losing that football game. So Saban is kind of in a Dabo Swinney situation for the temporary time. He needs a good quarterback. And with the transfer portal, with Alabama's brand, that shouldn't be an issue next year. This was weird. And we knew this coming into the year that quarterback was the big question mark. And arguably, that's why they didn't lose. That's why they lost. If Bryce Young plays yesterday, he's not throwing 2 interceptions. I'd probably take Alabama to win the game if Bryce Young plays.
Yeah, but see, I think that's like Alabama is always going to have talent. I mean, if you're going by the team talent composite, they have more talent than anyone in the country this year. And their next quarterback is probably on their roster. It's probably Dylan Lonergan, a 5-star freshman. And I think they have another 1 or 2 highly ranked kids coming in. Eli Holstein, I think, is one of them. Like, they're going to continue to get talent at the quarterback spot. They're going to be a talented roster. I have no concerns about that. But their inability to develop receiver talent over the last 2 years has been an issue. I mean, they didn't have a game-breaking receiver last year. And in 2021, 2022, when they played Georgia in the national championship, their best receiver, Jamison Williams, came via the portal from Ohio State because he wasn't good enough to get on the field at Ohio State because he was behind Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. I mean, Bama's receivers last night weren't great. Their best receiver this year is probably Jermaine Burton, and he transferred from Georgia, and this is his second year at Bama, and he hasn't been great there. There's a reason why Georgia wasn't really that upset that he left. Bama's got issues at certain spots, and it needs to be fixed. I mean, they're starting a true freshman left tackle, and Caden Proctor, and he got beat a few times last night. There's certainly things about this Bama team and the makeup of it that I think raise concern about where this is at. And like I said, I mean, I think they've lost 4 of their last 7 games against Power 5 opponents. And I know we can go back further than that and say, hey, well, the way they lost at Tennessee was a little bit fluky. They were penalized a ton. They lost on the last play of the game. They went into Death Valley last year and lost on the last play of the game. And Brian Kelly went for 2 and made a gutsy decision to do it. They lost. Texas and had a lot of penalties again last night, but that's kind of a pattern, right?
They got bailed out by Bryce Young.
So I mean, like it's kind of a pattern at this point. And are things slipping away from Bama big picture?
Yes, we've been saying this. Georgia has overtaken them. Do you remember those Alabama teams in 2010, 2011, 2012? They wouldn't give up more than 11 points a game. It was
But I think
unheard
the
of.
sport has changed a lot. I know
No,
you
but look
entered the
what
season,
Georgia's
you thought
doing.
that they were going to play, quote, joyless death ball or whatever their players said, or joyless murder ball, whatever they said at SEC Media Days. But I don't think you can win that way anymore.
Georgia does.
That's not true. Georgia had the more explosive plays than anyone in the country last year. Just
No, defensively, they
statistically
held
speaking.
people to 10, 11 points a game.
Sure,
Two
but I
things.
think Bama's issue this year is that they're not going to be able to score.
I know, but again, like these old Alabama teams wouldn't get lit up with these deep shots. Quinn had a field day yesterday. It's a combination of they need great quarterback play. You're 100% right about the wide receivers. They used to be wide receiver U. That's Ohio State now by a mile. And number two is I don't think the defense, and I know we're nitpicking because it's Alabama, but it's nowhere near the pre-2015, pre-2016 level of defenses. And it's going to hurt them. If they play Georgia, Georgia will beat them in the SEC title game. They will strangle them. They will win 31-17 because I don't think Milroe can win a game by himself. He's not that good of a quarterback.
No, I mean, like, he has great arm talent, right? Like, we saw his deep shot into the end zone. That was pretty impressive. I mean, he averaged 9.4 yards of completion last night, but he also threw 2 picks, and the second pick was horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it was wide open. I mean, it was just jumped right there. I mean, it was a terrible decision to make that throw. And he has the arm talent to make those wow throws, but he misses a lot of routine passes, and he's not comfortable in the pocket at all. Like, that was very clear last night in the game against Texas. Was any sign of any pressure, he was trying to escape and he was looking to run. And he is an electric runner of the football. But you have to be able to throw the ball as well as a quarterback, and he can't do that consistently enough right now.
Like, yeah, I wouldn't panic. I wouldn't be like, oh, Nick Saban's done. He's never going to win a national title again. That's probably not true. I mean, make a couple adjustments in their back there. Get a better offensive coordinator than Tommy Rees, most likely. But for the foreseeable future, I mean, it is clear that Georgia's the new big block in the SEC. And Texas, man, I'm confident they're going to play well in SEC play. Like, if I'm a Texas A&M fan, I'm like, crap. We had our moment and we blew it. They never took advantage fully of being that SEC big brother. And now Texas is going to have all the same resources and they're firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, I mean, Texas certainly has a ton of momentum. And for Texas, like I said, now it's all about not screwing up and maintaining this level of play for the next 10 weeks of the season. And that's the most difficult part of this. That is what has made Nick Saban's Alabama such a good program, is their consistency week in and week out for so many seasons. That is what has made Georgia such a good team the last 2-3 years, and what has made them the favorite for the national championship this year is that they are so consistent every single week. And they don't generally play close games against teams that they're not supposed to play close games to. I know Georgia screwed around last year and played closer with Kent State and Mizzou in back-to-back weeks. But generally speaking, Georgia doesn't play with their food very often.
And when they play for food against TCU, they mop the floor. Hey, and speaking of which, I just want to talk about Sark and a reversal of fortunes. Because I remember at the end of 2022, they lost a lot of close games. And then they go into that Alamo Bowl. And he looked like an absolute psychopath in the pregame tunnel. Remember that security guard tried to touch his shoulder?
Yeah, he yells at him. Yeah.
He just lost his mind, screaming F-bombs. You think about the USC days. It all went away. It just seems like they run a clean program. It just seems like they have a bunch of talent. He seems more, I don't know, filtered. I would have not have predicted this in December of 2022, that Texas could be 11-1, 12-0 football team in the regular season. I tip my hat to him.
I think he deserves a lot of credit.
Yeah.
And I think it's certainly not like he's achieved everything at Texas, like I said. Because if they screw around and they lose to someone like they have for the last decade, then this doesn't really mean that much, right? But they've built this in a very strategic manner. He's built it, and they look like an SEC school.
Yeah.
They look like that when they get off the bus. They're big, they're strong, they're physical. That's what Texas looks like. You
What
don't you don't by mistake go beat Alabama at Bryant-Denny Stadium. You don't do that on accident. Even if I think this Bama team ends up going 9-3, that's still a really good Alabama team, right? You don't do that on accident.
what would be the point spread if they played Georgia right now, neutral site?
Well, it was 7 points against Alabama
On
at
the road.
Bryant-Denny. It was 7.
Yeah.
So less than a touchdown, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, they are a legit threat. They're within the margin of error. Let's say Quinn just goes off and pulls off a Joe Burrow. I would not bet my life that Texas doesn't win the national title this year. I think there's a chance.
Oh, I think that there's a chance that Texas can win a national championship.
Right now, the only teams that I'm kind of feeling that can win a national title, Georgia, Texas, and that's it. I'm not taking Michigan to win a national title because I think at the end of the day, if they play lined up against Georgia, they're going to lose. I don't think they can beat Georgia.
What about like Florida State?
I'm not sure about Florida State. Do you trust Travis?
He's looked very good the first 2 weeks.
I think Florida State's very good, and I'm impressed with those wide receivers. But for me, for them to go from – they're not as talented as Texas, especially. So, no, I'm not going to take Florida State to win the national title. I think this is a two-man race. It's Texas and Georgia. And Ohio State can sneak up there. They can.
I'm not at the point where I'm like going to rule teams out of winning the national championship after week 2. I mean, I still think
Well, who do you
Alabama
think
can win a
will?
national championship.
You think Bama can win the national title this year?
I do.
You think they can win the rest of their – they would have to win the rest of their games this year to win the national title.
You think it's impossible for them to beat Georgia?
I don't think they would.
I don't think they would. I don't think they would, but
I'm
I think there's a
confident
world where
in saying
Alabama wins a national title in 2023.
I would bet a lot of money they don't this year. I'm confident to say Texas can win. Georgia can win. McCord, if he's an absolute dog, can win. There's only 3 teams I feel like. What are your 3? Or 4?
My list would be longer than 3.
So you think Oregon, USC, Michigan?
I think that Georgia certainly. I think I would include Alabama as well. I wouldn't completely rule out LSU. I think you would be foolish to not include Florida State if you're including LSU. I would also include Ohio State. I know I've previously said that I don't think Michigan could win the national championship this year, but the way that JJ McCarthy's kind of thrown the ball around in the first couple of weeks of this season has kind of got me feeling like they're letting him cook, and I didn't think that they would let him do that. So maybe that's something that is a little bit more possible. I think Texas is a possibility. And if USC's defense plays like it has the last 2 weeks, maybe there's an opportunity that they're able to do that. Am I predicting that? No, certainly not. I wouldn't put USC in that group right now. But I it's just really early right now for me to be, ruling teams completely out of the CFP or the national championship picture, I guess.
But that is college football. Who wins the national title? It's Georgia. It's Alabama.
Georgia wins, yeah.
It's LSU with Joe Burrow and generational talent at every skill position, every skill talent position. I don't know. Should be a good year of college football. I would love to have a 12-team playoff this year because there is a world where USC, Texas, Michigan, Florida State, Georgia, there could be big brands being left out of the top 4 this year. And I think that's unfortunate. If we had a 12-team playoff, we would be having so many of these big brands play each other in the first 1 or 2 rounds. You would get that Texas USC playoff game or the quarterfinal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to enjoy the 4-team though. Like I'm excited for the 4-team. I like the 4-team. I'm more excited for 12, but I'm excited for one last year of the 4. So yeah, we'll see where everything goes. I mean, there's a lot that can happen. I mean, I think only two Nick Saban teams have been undefeated when they won the national championship at Alabama. So it wouldn't be unprecedented for Alabama to run the table and win the national championship. And
this would be the worst loss of their national championship teams.
In terms of where the game was played and the final score of it, yeah, I can agree with that.
Ole Miss was a fluke. in 2015. There was one play where it was a 75-yard deflected pass
That was
touchdown.
the first play of the game.
It was in the third quarter. It's what
Oh, maybe
was
we're talking about different plays or different locations, but they had a tip touchdown catch early in the game against Bama in one of those 2 years. I think that was actually the game in Oxford.
the year they lost in 2011. They lost 9-6 in the game of the century. So it's going to be difficult for me to see them run the rest of the table. They're still going to be dangerous. They're going to be favorites every game this year in the regular season. But when they play Georgia and get that second loss, out the door.
Speaking of second losses, Nebraska now has 2 losses this season, and quite frankly, they are a mess. That program they need to face the reality that they're just in a horrible spot. It's obviously the second season of Matt Rule at Nebraska, first season of Matt Rule at Nebraska. So there's some logic behind it being a mess there still, but he kind of made the decision to keep a lot of the Scott Frost players that were there.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a coincidence, Carson, that in the first 2 weeks of the season, a lot of the same mistakes that led to Nebraska losing games under Scott Frost are happening again under Matt Rule.
If they
By the way,
play,
they lost to Colorado for those that missed the score of the game. They lost to Colorado 34-14, right? Or 36-14.
they lost 36-14. But dude, I watched the first half. I was impressed the way that defense played.
Yes.
The issue is he wanted to get his next PJ Walker, a guy like, from Temple. He found him in Jeff Sims. And Sims is a terrible quarterback. He's sloppy. He can't manage the clock. Careless turnovers. I'm telling you, if Casey Thompson is the quarterback of Nebraska, they're not losing to Minnesota 13-10. I don't think they beat Colorado because I think Colorado has too much skill position talent. They're going to pull away. But that first half, I honestly thought Nebraska outplayed Colorado. Matt Rule made a serious strategic error handpicking Jeff Sims. Out of all the transfer quarterbacks in America, he decided to get a guy that threw more interceptions than touchdowns at Georgia Tech in his first year and never threw more than 10 touchdowns. He's a runner. You know what they always say about Justin Fields? Oh, yeah, he throws decent for a running back. Well, that's accelerated with Jeff Sims. He needs to be benched because he's the reason why Nebraska was not up 10-0 at halftime against Colorado. And that changes the entire game. They got gassed. So I'm not selling Matt Rule big picture. What they've done with the defense the past 2 weeks, it's a lot better than what it was under Scott Frost. But the offense, they're going to have to find an identity, and they're going to have to wake up for the 21st century. I'm still a Matt Rule guy. No concerns, big picture.
Yeah, so I'll get to that, I guess. You talk about Jeff Sims. I mean, he certainly has not been good. Is it 6
He's the worst.
total turnovers in the first 2 weeks?
He has 7.
7? So, and only one of those was an interception on Saturday against Colorado. So he had a couple of lost fumbles as well.
He had 3 against Minnesota. He had 3 interceptions.
Yeah, and I know they snapped the ball into a man in motion at one point against Colorado as well. They're just not a good team. They're not well coached right now. They're not very disciplined. And you talked about Jeff Sims, you need to be benched. They said after the game that they didn't even consider doing that until he got hurt. And he didn't play the last 9 minutes or whatever it was of the game.
Yeah.
I think that says a lot about what they think of his backups. One of them being Chubba Purdy. And I guess he was the third one to play. They had some Heinrich Harburg guy play and throw 6 passes, one of which was a touchdown. But I agree with you on the defensive side of things, but they're a mess.
I mean, there's no way.
It's going to take a long time. And he talked about that this was in a better spot than what he inherited at Baylor and what he inherited at Temple. And to be honest, it's hard to be in as bad or worse of a situation than what you inherited at Baylor. But I think that this is going to take some time for them to rebuild. And as far as me being a Rule believer long term, of the coaches that were hired into the Big Ten West this year, those 4 coaches, I think Matt Rule is a very good coach. I couldn't care less about what he did when he was coaching the Panthers because it's a totally different league. It's a totally different job requirement. But I wanted to see him and I wanted to see Nebraska win before I bought all in on that. Because the Scott Frost hire, everyone was like, that makes so much sense. That's going to work. That's going to be work perfectly. And it didn't. And we've all kind of said the same thing about Matt Rule. And I kind of want to just see if it works. Like, I kind of want to see positive momentum. I want to see them win football games before I go all in on that, because in the offseason, I even felt like they were doing a ton of great things. They were competent in their measures of what they were doing. I understood why they brought in Jeff Sims to compete with Casey Thompson. And I trust Matt Rule and I trust his staff to think that Sims won the job outright. I can't imagine they put the worst quarterback on the roster. Or maybe Casey Thompson chose to leave because he didn't want to continue a competition into training camp. But this is going to take a while. They're going to get their first one, I would imagine, in week 3 because I think they play Northern Illinois.
Yeah.
But the way that he's like, if I was a Nebraska fan, I guess I would just be very frustrated when a team just beat the crap out of me with 80-something new players.
I know, but context matters. First of all, Casey Thompson reunited with his former head coach, Tom Herman, at Florida Atlantic. He didn't want to do the quarterback competition. He got out. I don't care if Matt Rule thinks Jeff Sims was better. He's wrong. He's wrong. Casey Thompson, look at the stats last year. Before he fractured his hand, he was kind of a threat with the deep ball. He had some very good moments last year. That you cannot make excuses. Matt Rule messed up. But talking about, they've been underdogs in both of these games. Like, yeah, you lost to Minnesota, a consistent program that wins 9 games on the road, and you lost in a crazy 4th and 10, touchdown, foot dragging touchdown with, a minute left. Colorado, they just beat the defending runner-ups in college football, TCU. They're the biggest story in sports. Sanders could be a first-round draft pick, and I would argue that they played
wasn't
better.
even close.
In the
To
second
me, that
half.
says more about Colorado, who we should actually be talking about, because to me, Colorado has now proven that they can go win a game in a shootout. They can fight through tough situations in the first half and then be the better team in the second half. And you know what good teams do, Carson? They beat the crap out of bad teams. And that's what Colorado did on Saturday against Nebraska.
What are you supposed to do when Sims is quarterback? Let's compare Jeff Sims, who can't throw the football, and Sanders, who's going to be a first-round pick. Like, of course Colorado is going to win this football game. They pulled away. They are a better football team at the moment. But it's not fair for Nebraska fans to think their rebuild's crappy because they're witnessing.
Right now it is.
They're witnessing the greatest rebuild of all time with Deion Sanders, which is a fluke. Deion Sanders is a once-in-a-generational head coach. And he has Travis Hunter, 5-star corner.
Yeah, you can't bring that if you're
exactly.
Yeah, you're
so why are we criticizing Nebraska?
I think that there's reasons to be critical of the way that they've handled it. Why did you keep all of those players?
I would just argue they would be a 1-1 football team with a slightly better quarterback. I condemn Matt Rule for keeping Jeff Sims, but the defense is a lot better than what it was last year. Scott Frost had arguably his 5 years a bottom half defense in the Big Ten every single season. So let's watch Big Ten play. When Nebraska plays Illinois, I kind of think Nebraska's going to win that game. They're going to beat Northwestern. I could see them being Maryland. Michigan State might become a dumpster fire. So if Nebraska goes 5-7 this year, that's okay. And we've seen what Matt Rule does in the first 2 years at his programs. Temple, what do you win? A combined 4 games? Baylor, he went 1-11 in his first season. And then they win a Big 12 title 2 years later. It is so early to criticize Matt Rule big picture. I just disagree. I think it has been a better situation.
That's fair. I guess I just think that Nebraska needs to realize and face the reality of what their situation is. And it's pretty bleak right now. Like, they're not a good football team.
Yeah.
Let's call it that. They're just not a good football team because they got smoked yesterday.
a lot of teams are going to get smoked by TCU, not TCU, by Colorado. And realistically, what were the expectations for Nebraska this year? Probably 5-7.
But you shouldn't get smoked. It was a 3-point betting line.
I don't know what to tell you. Like, first half, they played great. Jeff Sims gave Colorado 13 points, and they pulled away. Like, it's going to be difficult keeping up for Nebraska when you're playing a top 25 Colorado team.
Which is what Colorado is.
Yeah.
They're probably what they're going to be all year unless they get a rash of injuries.
Why aren't we sounding the alarm bells on Minnesota for probably should have losing?
Because they're 2-0.
That's what, but it just like realistically.
That's why. What do you mean?
Well, context matters. Like, we're not thinking Matt Rule's supposed to go 10-2 this year. We're looking at big picture, and the product on the field compared to last year
is not any better.
Against Minnesota,
they're 0-2.
They're 0-2. They lost.
They're 0-2, and they've lost games in a very similar fashion each of the first 2 weeks.
I mean, this is intellectually dishonest by you. That they lost in a last-minute touchdown to Minnesota.
Is that not how they lost for 6 years under Scott Frost?
Last year was terrible. Record in one-possession games? Last year they were getting blown out by teams like.
What was their record in one-possession games under Scott Frost?
0-8. In that one year.
What's their record under? The way they lost to Minnesota was very similar to the way they lost a lot of games under Scott Frost.
But it
was bad mistakes. It was coverage bust. It was turnovers. The way they lost to Minnesota in week 1 was very reminiscent of the way that they lost games under Scott Frost.
I'm going to trust the guy. It's year 1. You went on the road against Minnesota and nearly won. I don't think it's a bad thing. If this happens in year 3, sure. Let's talk about Matt Rule. Just right now, I feel like we're being alarmists. These are 2 games they were projected to lose. They lost both, and we'll see how they do against other Big Ten teams. Illinois is not beating Nebraska. I'll tell you right now. They're going to beat Northwestern. They can beat Maryland. They're going to beat Northern. They're going to beat Louisiana Tech. And they'll win 5 football games and get it ready for next year. Get a good transfer quarterback. They make a bowl next year. That's all I have to say about Nebraska. Go Big Red, baby.
Yeah, you think way highly of them in comparison to me and what the national consensus seems to be about Nebraska right now.
I'm sorry.
They're not a good football team.
You're wrong. I'm not saying they're good. But we never thought they were going to be great this year. This is what Matt Rule does. He breaks it down.
But he didn't really break it down. There's a lot of players still there from the Scott Frost tenure.
Yeah, and Scott Frost would recruit top 6 Big Ten classes. Recruiting wasn't the issue for Nebraska. It was where was the talent in the specific places. And let's be honest, personnel is policy. There's some serious question marks about Scott Frost's character and commitment to the football program. And some boneheaded decisions like an onside kick against Northwestern when you're up by 11, which gave Northwestern the game last year, their only victory.
I mean, that was not a good decision.
Like, we're not seeing that with Matt Rule. What we're seeing is a painfully bad quarterback that is eliminating any chance for them to win a football game. If Casey Thompson is on this team, they're 1-1. Worst case. So I'm actually excited. I was texting my friends, Matt Rule with the graph going up after the first half. I'm all in. God, I love Nebraska. I should have gone there. I actually visited there in college.
That's a horrible place to want to visit. You grew up in the Chicago suburbs. Why would you want to go to Lincoln, Nebraska for college?
Well, it's in a decent market. You know, I was a big 1B broadcasting, so you'd kind of be in Lincoln, Omaha. It's a decent area. I love football, and it was cheap and out-of-state tuition compared to some other schools. I didn't go there. I went to Illinois, but no, I have a soft spot for Nebraska. The black shirt defense was back in the first half.
Yeah, the rest of that roster's in a horrible spot, and they've got a lot to figure out. Texas A&M's defense also has a lot to figure out after they lose 48-33 to Miami. I find it very ironic that all of Texas A&M's issues were on the offensive side of the ball for the entirety of last season. They were often included in conversations with Iowa with how inept their offense was at points last season. And now it's the defense that is leading to the Aggies losing football games. Like I said, they lose 48-33 to Miami on the road. Maybe this Miami team is better than we thought they were going to be.
They are.
They certainly played well. They scored a lot of points. They fought with Texas A&M in what was a close game until the end of the fourth quarter, pretty much, until they scored a couple times. But yeah.
Not good.
Nope.
Bad.
They are a top 5 to 7 most talented roster in the country, and they just can't put it all together.
No. And with Texas, you got to be sick to your stomach. You just watch Texas spank Alabama in the trenches, and you lose to Miami. And I'm going to give Miami some credit. I thought last year they underperformed because with Manny Diaz, they were an 8-5 football program. I thought Van Dyke had some really, really, really good moments, and I'm going to think that Miami might be a player in the ACC this year. They could go 10-2. This is a good football team. But if you're Texas A&M, it's exactly. Offense is the issue. The defense is good. And then they reverse roles this year. Texas A&M, man, if they go 6-6, 7-5, is Jimbo safe?
Do they have 70, 80 something million dollars to fire him?
I think they can find some oil money.
Do they find? Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
I think there's money. And I think Texas A&M is a good job. Like, yeah, of course you're in the shadow of Texas, but they care. It's well-resourced. You can win 9 football games with the right head coach. Jimbo Fisher historically is a 9-4 football coach, 8-5 without Jameis Winston. Maybe he's just not as good as we thought he was. This is unacceptable. Like, this was not a good loss. And the way they lost, getting embarrassed by Van Dyke, somebody's got to answer some questions.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's like they've
never been good historically. Let's be real.
They've never been consistently good for historic. But I mean, they've recruited a ton of top 100 defensive linemen, and they just didn't get very much pressure yesterday. Like Van Dyke threw for 374 yards and 5 touchdowns, which I believe is half of what he threw for last year. I think he threw 10 last year. They just didn't get pressure. And last year, their defensive front was good. Last year, their defense is what kept them in a lot of games because they lost a lot of close games last year. So what happened in the offseason that the defense now gets torched by a team that we didn't really think had elite wide receiver play?
I don't know. Maybe DJ Judkins has an answer for it.
They have 2 receivers finished with at least 94 yards, and one of them had 3 touchdown receptions. And his long was 64 yards.
I mean, it just, if we have to bring up every year with this team, they have Kellen Mond, but, they just couldn't beat Alabama. They're really good. They just need better quarterback play. It's just every year we hear something. And it was the same crap with Kevin Sumlin. Kevin Sumlin had some pretty good recruiting classes at Texas A&M, but the defense went down the tubes. I mean, there's just always an issue. Can we just admit that maybe Kevin Sumlin is not a competent head coach? Maybe Jimbo Fisher is a man of the 2008s, and he's not really built for a football program in 2023.
See, but everyone thought that everyone thought that because the offense was bad. So then he went and hired a really highly regarded offensive mind in Bobby Petrino, and it looks fixed. They scored 50 points in week 1. They scored 33 points in week 2 on the road at Miami.
Yeah, I know, but when you give up 48
yards,
when you give up 48 points, you're going to put up some points because defenses take their foot off the gas and you make it close.
Sure, fine. But
it's not a great offense either.
The idea it's a vastly improved offense. I don't think they scored more than 30 points once last year.
What about
if they did? It was just one time.
Why
and now they've done it twice in back-to-back weeks. And I realized last week was against a cupcake opponent. But the offense looks fixed. The offense looks good enough for them to win games in the SEC. And now the defense looks like it's not going to be good enough for them to win games in the SEC. What happened?
Why? I feel like in college football, we think about that too much. Oh, well, if you just fix the offense, if you just fix this, I'm a victim of that with Matt Rule and the offense. I'm saying the same crap. But now I'm thinking, let's just look at the overall record for the past 10 years of Texas A&M. They are mediocre, painfully. They've had one elite year, and that was during the COVID year. They're just not as good as we think they are. And
why are they not as good as we think they are? They have a top 6 most talented roster in the sport.
Well, then that's an issue. Then obviously maybe the head coach should go. I'll start a GoFundMe and get some oil money and get Jimbo out of there because he stinks and he's annoying. You can get so many other guys that would take that job. He's not that good, man.
I mean, it's a very good job. I agree. But they haven't won a lot there. Like you've kind of said, like they've never really been able to string together consecutive winning seasons for a long time, but all the resources are there.
They have won double-digit games one time since 2012.
They have won conference championship in the last 30 years, correct?
Yeah, 1998, they won it.
Yes.
They won the Big 12.
And I realize it's really hard to win the SEC where they've been for a decade now. Fine. I realize it was really hard for them to win the Big 12 when they were there. Oklahoma was there and they were clicking. Oklahoma won a national title at that point.
Nebraska.
Texas won a national championship. Nebraska was good. Obviously, K-State had some really good years at that point as well. But like, I just want to know what has led to them not being able to be, what has led to the issues for them between week 1 and week 2. Or excuse me, between last year and this year on the defensive side of the ball. And maybe it's just one game. Maybe teams play poorly on one side of the ball every now and then, and it's just a mirage for the way a team will play the entire season. But I'd be concerned if I was an A&M fan about the way my defense played.
I see at least 4 losses on the schedule, and that's being nice. At Tennessee, they're not winning. Alabama, not winning. At LSU, they're not winning. And then they still have to play Ole Miss on the road.
See, but I think that they can win all of those games that you just said they lost.
You think they can, but let's look at the past 10 seasons. And they just lost to Miami.
Yeah, I agree. But like, would you be shocked if A&M won any of those games?
11-1?
No, if they go 11-1, I'll be pretty surprised. But if A&M goes and beats Tennessee in Knoxville, are you be shocked?
No, but we're not paying Jimbo Fisher to, well, we can beat Tennessee. They want sustained success.
I know.
Any individual game, we saw it 2 years ago.
You just said, hey, there's four more losses on their schedule.
I think it's likely they lose those games, and I didn't even mention Ole Miss. The reality is, out of those 4 games, they're going to lose 3 of them. Probably, I bet my life they lose at least 2 of those. And they're not paying Jimbo Fisher to go 8-5 and go to Gator Bowl.
They're paying him $10.5 million or $9.5 million a year.
They're paying him so you don't lose your $1,000 bet that they win a national championship in the next 3 years.
Yeah, well, maybe they hired a really good coach and he inherits a really, really talented roster and, kind of does what Urban Meyer did at Florida.
Urban Meyer would be fun there. Oh, Urban Meyer would be
fun. He's not never take it ever again. It's not going to happen. Don't include that name in coaching searches.
I saw a Michigan State hot board and they're like, yeah, I think Urban Meyer is a top 2 candidate for the job. Urban Meyer is not taking the Michigan State job. I don't think he ever coaches again. I think he's done. I think he's content. He's good on Fox.
Let's talk about the Michigan State situation. You obviously grew up a Michigan State fan, so I think this gives you a lot of knowledge to talk about for sure. And I think you have a good knowledge base to kind of expand on it. So late Saturday night, it becomes public. I believe ESPN may have actually been the first to break the news that Mel Tucker was being investigated for a sexual harassment case related to Title IX at Michigan State University with a woman who tragically was involved with a rape case in her past and who now runs an organization that is designed to educate and create conversation, I guess, on how to prevent those kind of situations from happening in the future. And her focus is largely on speaking to college athletics programs because those were the people who did to her what happened to her. And Michigan State and Mel Tucker created a good relationship with her through this organization. It was designed to do all the things that it was designed to. She spoke to the team frequently. She had a good organization, good working relationship with him and the program at first. And then it seems like, according to reports and statements and investigation from Michigan State and their legal counsel and the Title IX investigation, that things allegedly became inappropriate at times with Mel Tucker and this lady. And at one point, it turned into allegedly a late phone call between the two where he is accused of masturbating on a phone call with her on the other line, unwanted. She wasn't unaware of it happening. She ends up filing a complaint to Michigan State's Title IX department, and that was all reported by USA Today. I believe most of those details. Give credit to them. It was a very well reported story. And Mel Tucker has now been suspended as of Sunday afternoon indefinitely without pay by Michigan State. And this is a sticky situation, Carson. And I felt like him being suspended indefinitely was pretty inevitable last night when I read the story from USA Today. And I was honestly surprised it took as long as it did for Michigan State to come out publicly and announce that on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. Mel Tucker probably coached his last football game at Michigan State. Even if he's not found guilty of wrongdoing, as we talked about, they will probably go the Chris Beard route with Texas, and he won't be coaching again. I guess from what I read, it's a formality that he gets fired, but there's legal mechanisms with the college where they have to suspend him first, and they're going to wait till October 6th. So I think one thing that's not mentioned is
the significance of October 6th is that is the hearing for the Title IX investigation, to make that clear for the people listening.
So that's why Michigan State didn't fire him. I mean, they've been investigating this with an independent third party investigating it. They've interviewed Clark, they've interviewed Mel Tucker, and they decided that October 6th will decide if he gets fired or not. I think it's good to do, a lot of times in society, I feel like it's guilty until proven innocent. They were giving him the benefit of the doubt. They were trying to do a fair trial. What I disagree with is you should probably have that in August, that hearing. That shouldn't be October 6th or in the middle of the football season. That's not fair to the football team. It's not fair to the players. It's not fair to the assistant coaches. If you're Michigan State, this is a huge distraction mark, which would be a lot less distracting if this happened on August 1st. To drag this into the middle of the football season does a disservice to everyone, to both
I don't
parties.
know how much better of a situation it is if he gets fired August 15th.
I just don't think October 6th, middle of the season.
I think you're kind of splitting hairs on how bad of a situation it is. I mean, look at the situation at Northwestern. I mean, it's a complete lost season. I mean, if Mel Tucker loses his job in the middle of August, what
I'm saying is people are like, why did Michigan State, do they not learn from Northwestern? Because Northwestern they fired him once more light was brought with the reporting. Well, Michigan State decided October 6th, we're going to give him his trial with the Michigan State Board of Directors. And I agree with that. You just have to move it up. So this is a weird situation. Mel Tucker coached his last game at Michigan State. And now Michigan State's going to have to rebuild with another coach. And it's not a good situation for the program. It doesn't seem like they can ever just stick the landing in the past 10 years. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, so I don't want to I see Mel Tucker's path back to coaching at Michigan State unlikely. I don't want to just assume that he's fired before that decision is made, out of respect for him and out of respect for the due process of the entire situation. And to be clear, I think that the way that the whole situation has been reported is very unfortunate for each party. But if these details are true, more specifically for the female involved, because that should not happen to anyone. And I would like to criticize Michigan State for one more thing. They knew that this investigation was going on for months, and they allowed Mel Tucker to coach the first 2 games of the regular season.
That's exactly what I was saying. Yeah, you have to move up this trial. This is crazy.
Then it becomes public information, and they have a press conference today with 3 questions only, which in of itself is a joke that you only allowed 3 questions from the press. And their athletic director, Alan Haller, was asked about what changed during the process to go from allowing Mel Tucker to be on the sidelines coaching to now suspended without pay. And this is from Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic. She tweeted this quote from Haller, Michigan State's athletic director. Quote, interim measures were in place and those interim measures have been updated. Initially, there was to be no contact with the complainant and then also increased oversight from me of the program, but then also the coach. So it's an ongoing process and we update those interim measures as we receive information. I think that is a horrible excuse for essentially saying, yeah, this became public and we didn't really want it to become public. And we feel like we have to do this. I think that's horrible.
It's similar to Northwestern. It's the same situation regarding accelerating the timeline or the punishment because the public knows.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, props to USA Today for the great reporting that they did. And I think that Michigan State, we don't need to go down the complete rabbit hole of like the issues that Michigan State University has had with this stuff over the last decade, and extends further beyond that because of the Larry Nassar situation, the women's gymnastics program. But there seems to need to be a lot of things corrected and fixed there with the way that they handle these situations.
Yeah.
Because
it's not good for the fan base. Because no fan asked for this. The supporters of your school, you're always going to love your school.
But it goes even beyond that. Like, what are you doing to protect people who are victims of this? What are you doing to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Because there's now been 2 major instances at Michigan State that have come to light within the last decade at most of sexual misconduct within the athletic department within the university.
The Larry Nassar scandal literally almost brought down the school. I mean, if you look, that destroyed public reputation. Admissions went way down following Larry Nassar. And that was something that was allowed to fester for years. That was a horrible situation. I mean, that is on the scale. I don't even know the correct word, but that was terrible. That is Jerry Sandusky situation. And obviously nobody wants this. And yeah, there's going to have to be more just accountability in general around the country. I mean, we see this in college football. We see this with Baylor. We see this with Penn State. So yeah, it's a poor situation.
Let's expand this. If Mel Tucker is to lose his job, which in your words and based off of your reading of things, it seems like you feel like that is likely. I would probably agree with you. Where is Michigan State as a program, as a job, as an opportunity for a head coach? Because we've seen them win a Big Ten title within the last decade. We've seen them be really, really good. We know that the Big Ten is going to be set up very well financially within the next decade. We know that Michigan State is committed to paying a head football coach a lot of money because they were paying Mel Tucker a fully guaranteed contract of $9.5 million annually after his 11-2 season in 2021. And we know that is a school historically that has had success.
I don't think it's a bad job. I think in 2020, people started characterizing it as a poor job. And if we remember, D'Antonio really did the program dirty. He stopped recruiting high school talent.
By the way, he is now going to be brought back as an associate head coach or as a liaison kind of like situation where Michigan State's interim head coach for this time is their defensive backs coach, former player. We'll be able to go to D'Antonio for advice and whatever else.
Yeah. When D'Antonio left, though, I mean, the talent really dropped off. I mean, they were getting low 3 stars, and there was a contract clause with him, with D'Antonio. If you were the head coach by February 1st of 2020, he was going to get a $5 million bonus. It was a thank you bonus for being at the program for a long time. And it was reported in the past couple of weeks that D'Antonio committed to another rebuild. He was going to get a whole new staff, a new recruiting approach. And they were going to give him 5 to 10 years to make Michigan State something else, to correct the last 4 years. He took the money and retired. And that made it really hard to get a new head coach. And this was also in the aftermath of Larry Nassar. So a guy like Luke Fickell, who they flew down in a private jet, seemed like a done deal. They were going to get Luke Fickell, decided Michigan State is not the same job that it was 5 years ago. They tried to get Robert Saleh. He's an NFL guy. He wasn't interested. So they got Mel Tucker as their head coach. And has the Tucker tenure been great? No. But they've also had an 11-2 Peach Bowl season. They've had talented wide receivers like Reed, like Coleman. They've been competitive. And last year, they had a pretty good high school football recruiting class, within the Big Ten. So I don't think this job is as bad as people think. Do I think they can get a Luke Fickell and Urban Meyer, those big names? Absolutely not. But, you think they could get Fickell?
I do. Well, not now.
A guy I think they could get, as you mentioned, I think they could get a Ryan Walters. I think they could get a Sean Lewis, a very good head coach.
See, I think that Michigan State can get a better coach than that.
I think they can. So we agree. I think they can get a pretty good head coach. I think Lance Leipold would listen. Guys like Brett Bielema really, really wanted the Michigan State job 4 years ago. So they're going to be able to get somebody for it. But it pays well. And Michigan State has a brand where they're people think they're cool, like the uniforms.
They do.
They got Party. They got Izzo. They got a little bit of swagger
cool
to them.
Logo, colors. Yeah.
Fun party school. Michigan State's going to be fine in this situation. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that that's a job that a lot of people would be interested in. It's certainly a job that is going to pay very well. It's a job that I do think has good winning potential. And it's a job in a school to me that is very committed to being good at football, which if you're a head coach, to know that you're going to go to a place that just opened a brand new facility and you're going to go to a place that was paying the previous coach $9.5 million annually.
Just for beating Michigan twice. That's why you got it.
This
is a football team where if you go 8-4, 9-3 and beat Michigan, you can run for mayor of East Lansing. They're going to love you. I think an interesting name is PJ Fleck. I think they can steal a sitting Big Ten coach. I think they can talk to Lance. So I'm interested to see in what direction Michigan State goes, because Mel Tucker, let's just base it X's and O's. I'm not sure he was worth $95 million.
Probably not.
I don't think he was a great football coach. He didn't really have a long track record. I just think he had a really good year because he had the best running back in college football.
Yeah. I think that of the current 14 Big Ten schools, I would say that I think Michigan State is a top 5 job.
Better than UCLA, USC,
Wisconsin. Of the current 14.
Of the current 14? I'd say it's in the ballpark of Nebraska. It's a top half Big Ten job, and arguably, I think it's decent. This is a much better job than what it looked like in 2020, without a doubt.
Now, I think that job becomes significantly more difficult in the expanded 18-team Big Ten.
That's everyone, though.
But that's everyone. So I think that they're going to be able to attract a pretty high-quality candidate if they end up deciding to move away from Mel Tucker this offseason.
Yeah. Well, we're going to know probably by October 6th whether Mel Tucker's fired or not. That's going to be the day for him, because that's when he's going to meet with university officials, and they're going to decide with their investigation. So we'll know by then.
Does Nick Saban have interest in returning to Michigan State?
Yes. That's actually a fun fact that you actually mentioned that, because in 2000, he left for LSU. And 2 weeks in the job, he called back Michigan State and said if he could come back, because he was homesick and it was a culture shock. He thought he made a mistake. It worked out for him that he pursued, that he kept that job at LSU. Fun fact about Nick Saban.
The South like a chameleon.
One thing with Nick Saban is when he took the LSU job, he had a private jet go up to East Lansing, and he told all of his assistant coaches, "All right, who wants to come with me?" Let's get on the jet, guys. Let's go to Baton Rouge. Not a single coach went on that plane, and they all
Anthony
stayed
LSU
back.
might get him a job.
They stayed back with Bobby Williams, who got promoted to Michigan State head coach because he won the Citrus Bowl. They all stayed back with Bobby. They thought they were going to build something special. Bobby got fired in 3 years. Meanwhile, Nick Saban is the greatest coach of all time. Problem with Nick Saban is he was kind of a coward. He's quoted saying, "Oh, it's Michigan this, Michigan that. We beat them this year, and they got the Orange Bowl bid. I can never outdo Michigan."
No, I just think he wanted to go somewhere where he felt like he could win a national championship. I think he made the Brian Kelly move 20 years before Brian Kelly made the Brian Kelly move.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, LSU back then, LSU was not the LSU what it is today. Like, we joke around. It's
but I think we all know that Nick Saban is a very intelligent man, and Nick Saban is a very deep thinker. And I think he probably understood the resources that were there. I'm sure he got promises from LSU's administration that was there at the time that those resources would be provided and or increased. And he understood that it was a better opportunity for him to win football games.
If he was at Michigan, he would have stayed at Michigan because that was the big boy. He didn't want to be second fiddle. Being at Michigan State lowers your chances of winning a national title because you have to deal with the big house, the winged helmets. So, yeah.
The winged helmets.
The best Michigan. No reason why they're not better than
Maybe Michigan would hire someone from Michigan staff.
They could. We'll see where they go. I think you can get a really good assistant coach. I think you can get if they want to get Matt Campbell now, I don't think Matt Campbell's saying no to Michigan State anymore.
I don't think they'd have interest in Matt Campbell now.
In 2020 they did. And Campbell was like, "Oh, no chance." He's waiting for Notre Dame. He's waiting for Ohio State. Like, he wouldn't get looked at anymore. Brian Hartline is an interesting name to watch.
That is a good name to watch.
For Michigan State, that would be good. Because didn't he get offered the Cincinnati job, or he was a front runner?
I think they interviewed him.
I think he would take Michigan State, though.
Michigan State's a better job than Cincinnati.
Michigan State, and the way that Michigan State kind of has a tradition with getting some pretty good wide receivers and adding Brian Hartline in that offensive scheme. He's young. He gets it. That would be a very good hire for Michigan State. God, why didn't I go to Michigan State over Illinois?
We'll see what happens at Michigan State. It'll certainly be a situation worth monitoring. And again, for all people involved, I think you hope that the truth kind of comes out, and the truth for people who are potential victims serves them in the way that they feel is satisfactory. And if you are being claimed or you are being alleged of doing some of these things that Mel Tucker is being claimed to have done, and it's true, well, then you probably deserve some sort of punishment. And if it's false, well, then you deserve to have your name cleared. So we'll see what the future holds for Michigan State and for Mel Tucker. It'll be a situation worth monitoring in the coming days, coming weeks. Everyone, thank you for listening. A little bit long with the Mel Tucker situation at the end, but we appreciate you guys for listening and sticking around at the end. To give us a like, rate, subscription, wherever you were to us. We appreciate that. It helps us out a ton. We'll be back later in the week to discuss some of the other ongoings in the college football world. Hopefully we're able to for a slower week 3. Have a good one.